it means that that's racism, because they don't celebrate White History Month. We don't have it. I'm part Italian. I don't have Italian History Month. So what I think it's doing is perpetuating what this divide is in our nation, quite honestly, because I don't feel like that should be highlighted. I don't think that they should be pushing their agenda on myself because I'm a straight male, I have a wife, and I have children. I don't think that I should have to be bombarded and brainwashed through media, through those months or Pride, Black History. I don't think that's something that should be, dictated to me.
Is it a learning opportunity?
Not at all, because when I was in school, we learned that, certain Black leaders, things like that. I don't need to hear it every single year for a whole month.
Criticize them for being at the bottom of the economic totem pole as being unwilling to pull their own weight. They seem to think that we blacks are equal and therefore ought to achieve like everybody else. That would be true if we all started out on the same equal footing. That's like running a 100-yard dash or the 100-meter dash. And then you start out at the 90-meter mark, and us black folks start out at point zero, and then you cross the finish line and stand up there and say, now how come y'all didn't do better in the race?
All right, as always with race, religion, and racism, we have Dr. and Pastor Fred Price. Now, for every episode, I try to remind people that racism is a sin. Racism is from the pits of hell. Prejudice, bigotry, all from the pits of hell. But yet we have too many people out here now who think that it's swept away, that we're all, singing songs and dancing with each other, and it's such a good time. But I like I said, I just have to remind people that prejudice and hate is still right up under us. Prejudice and hate, it just comes back in different forms, in different styles, languages, different concepts. And it's not so much as the outward now, it's more about coming underneath you and hitting you with a right cross and blindside you, so to speak. So without further ado, and now that I've given you a little reminder that this needs to be talked about till the end of time, let's check out Pastor Price.
In this segment of race and racism, I have been attempting to show the reality of racism as it exists today in the church. And obviously you can't talk about the church without talking about society in general, because it's pervasive in both places. And if you followed me all the way through up till now, it's like reading a book. Each session that we do is like a chapter in a book. Well, the writer has to write chapter 1, as it were, at least put it in the book as chapter 1, before he can put chapter 3 in the book. You know what I'm saying? And so it's progressive. And so this is what we've been involved in. So I have to build and build and build and build and build. So it's very important that you understand the connection. So I've got to go back just a little. So I want to quote from a speech given by the President of the United States, Mr. Bill Clinton, entitled One America in the 21st Century, at the University of California at San Diego commencement. University of California at San Diego, California, June 14, 1997. I quote, "But I believe the greatest challenge we face is also our greatest opportunity. Of all the questions of discrimination and prejudice that still exist in our society, the most perplexing one is the oldest and in some ways today, the newest. The problem of race. Though minorities have more opportunities than ever today, we still see evidence of bigotry, from the desecration of houses of worship, whether they be churches, synagogues, or mosques, to demeaning talk in corporate suites. There is still much work to be done by you, members of the class of 1997. But those who say we cannot transform the problem of prejudice into the promise of unity forget how far we have come. And I cannot believe they have ever seen a crowd like you. I grew up in the high drama of the Cold War. In the patriotic South, black and white Southerners alike wore our nation's uniform in defense of freedom against communism. They fought and died together, from Korea to Vietnam. But back home, I went to segregated schools, swam in segregated pools, sat in all white sections at the movies, and traveled through small towns in my state that still mark the restrooms and water fountains white and colored. By the grace of God, I had a grandfather with just a grade school education, but the heart of a true American who taught me that it was wrong. Now, I want to pause right there because this is one of the things and one of the purposes that I have been dealing with in this presentation on racism. The problem is not a genetic problem. In other words, racism, racial and color prejudice is not transmitted in the genes. It is a learned response. It is something that you can be taught. And in our country, it's primarily a problem of those who came before us teaching their children. Because if you stop and think about it, if we just use a historical landmark, for instance, like the end of the Civil War, 1865, it has been a lot of years since the end of the Civil War. And when the so-called slaves were set free and were emancipated, and supposedly racism was nipped in the bud, and it was supposed to be over, then how could it be up here where we live? It has to have a carrier. It has to have a host to transmit the foul thing. And it's not genetically transmitted, because if it was in the genes, then everybody in the whole world would be racist. And they're not. So then it had to be taught. And I want you to get what the president said. He was taught on the other side of it. He was taught a positive. But notice where it came from. It came from the teaching that he received. I want you to get that because it's so important. And there are a lot of people, I've said it before, but a lot of people, they balk at it, they get mad with me, and they want to become defensive. And obviously, I've said it 1,000 times, and I'll continue to say it, we're not talking about everybody. We know better than that, but we know that there are too many, and they're the ones that keep the thing going and keep the pot boiling. So catch up on this now. Listen to this again. By the grace of God, I had a grandfather with just a grade school education, but the heart of a true American who taught me that it was wrong. And by the grace of God, there were brave African Americans like Congressman John Lewis, who risked their lives time and time again to make it right. And there were white Americans like Congressman Bob Filner, Filner, a freedom rider on the bus with John Lewis in the long, noble struggle for civil rights, who knew that it was a struggle to free white people too. Let me say that I know that for many white Americans, this conversation may seem to exclude them or threaten them. That must not be so. I believe white Americans have just as much to gain as anybody else from being a part of the endeavor, much to gain from an America where we finally take responsibility for all our children so that they at last can be judged as Martin Luther King hoped, not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. End of quote. Now, you black folk and you white folk and you red, brown, and yellow folk that want to get up on your high horse and act like there is no such thing as racism and racial prejudice in this nation and in the church, I hope you just listen to what I read. This is your chief executive officer. All other things aside, he be still the head of the country. This be the boss man. And he's telling you that we got a problem with racism and racial prejudice. Thank you, Mr. President. Now, listen. Before you are tempted to push all this aside by saying that African Americans have what they have and are what they are and are where they are because of their own.
Now, I wanted to say this. You know, it would really be great for a Republican president to come out and make that same statement. Now, that would really be great. Now, that would really mean that we're all getting on the same page on this situation, on this subject. But, and not to say that all Republican presidents are a certain way, but the majority of them, it's kind of like they want to skip past that subject. And even talking about some Democrat presidents, you know, pretty much the same way. So you get a few who will come out and say so, like President Clinton, but the majority, if anybody says anything, most likely it's coming from a Democrat president rather than a Republican. It's just the way that's been. With the exception of you going back way in time of Abraham Lincoln, he was a Republican president. But just wanted to throw that in there.
Own innate shortcomings, I want you to consider some very important observations made by Dr. Claude Anderson in his book, Black Labor, White Wealth. Copyright August 1994 by Claude Anderson, Doctor of Education, Duncan and Duncan Incorporated Publishers, page 97. I quote, "It is common to hear Japanese, Chinese, and Germans being cited as model hard workers. Before blacks became obsolete as common labor in the 1960s, they were the models for doing the hardest, dirtiest, and most dangerous work. Ironically, conservatives and government are suggesting that emulating these recent immigrants and their hard work is the cure for blacks' protracted poverty and high unemployment." Now you listen to this carefully and follow this carefully. Recommending more hard work for a race of ex-slaves is similar to curing an alcoholic by suggesting that the drunk do more drinking. See, they call us shiftless and lazy, and we don't want to work. Having never been compensated for centuries of past labor is the bigger part of the problem, not whether black people are willing to work hard. If blacks were unwilling to work, it would be understandable after 400 years of no pay to low pay. You have to know me now. To me, this is not personal. I'm dealing with principles, dealing with truth, and not personal, directed against anybody or any ethnic group. I'm trying, as I believe God is leading me, to bring this thing out in the open so we can bring closure to it, so we can deal with it. If we continue to sweep it under the carpet, then we'll never get rid of it. See? But you white folk and you modern black folk, listen, you need to realize that your ancestors, your slave, great grandmas and grandpas. Now think about this. They worked as slaves for 246 years without getting a paycheck. Now, how do you expect people that have worked for 246 years while your mothers and fathers and great-grandparents, you white folks, were accumulating wealth. You got a 246-year head start and then wonder why we don't compete. You must be crazy. It would be understandable after 400 years of no pay to low pay. See, for the first 246 years, from 1619, when the first slaves were introduced to continental United States, to the end of the Civil War, that was no pay. And then from 1865 up to the late 1960s, it was low pay. Lowest pay on the totem pole. And then you expect us to compete and then get on your high horses and get upset when we talk about we can't make it. Turn the tables around and see where you would be. God, be fair at least. If you're not going to be honest, at least be fair. Which ethnic immigrants in America have worked harder than black slaves? Certainly the Japanese, Chinese, and the Germans did not work harder in America than black slaves. Listen carefully, if the Japanese, Chinese, and the Germans were the hardest workers, would it not have made more sense for colonial white society to have enslaved the Japanese, Chinese, and Germans, rather than blacks who were allegedly lazy and unwilling to work? Why would supposedly bright businessmen spend 250 years traveling all the way around the world to kidnap 35 to 50 million innocent but lazy blacks, then knowingly bring them to America to do work that other ethnic groups could do better? End of quote. Are you seeing anything? Are you getting this? Again, don't take this personal. I didn't call your name, and I don't mean it personally. You ought to have enough sense by now to know that if I'm bold enough to say this, I call your name. So if I haven't called your name, then it's not personal. But I want you to hear this. You need to hear it. Go, girl. I like this. All right, listen to this. Americans need to think about that before they throw too many rocks at supposedly lazy blacks. It's easy for people to criticize others when they don't know the whole story. People view blacks, when they want to criticize them for being at the bottom of the economic totem pole, as being unwilling to pull their own weight. They seem to think that we blacks are equal and therefore ought to achieve like everybody else. That would be true if we all started out on the same equal footing. But friends, that is not the case. Listen up. In a radio interview, Dr. Claude Anderson was asked a similar question about blacks in America. His answer was enlightening, to say the least. This was the question, and I quote, "Why can't black Americans do like Asians have done, or European Americans who have come to this country during the height of immigration and achieved the way that they have?" White folks, listen to this, because you're primarily the ones that criticize blacks for being lazy and shiftless and unwilling to work. Not all of you, we know that, so don't get personal. Here was Dr. Anderson's answer. Number one, blacks have never been treated the way Asians and Hispanics have been treated coming into this country. they have never been treated as an ethnic group. Secondly, all those other groups came into this country without the legacies and the baggage, the psychological baggage of having been enslaved and having been Jim Crow. Thirdly, they came into this country voluntarily versus having been dragged and bound, sold into this country. Fourthly, they came in with their culture intact, and they were able to use their culture to create businesses and create a broad sense of community and community unity. Fifthly, they kept their religion. They had their religion to again be a center of their lives for their values and to instill a sense of values for their families. And sixth, they could go back to their country of origin and use business opportunities to bring in artifacts to set up warehouses, wholesalers, and dealerships to sell artifacts from their culture. End of quote. Think about it. I am sure that many blacks as well as whites have never thought about it that way, never looked at it that way. What a disadvantage. And they want us to compete on an equal footing. That's like running a 100-yard dash or the 100-meter dash. And then you start out at the 90-meter mark, and us black folks start out at point zero, and then you cross the finish line and stand up there and say, now how come y'all didn't do better in the race? No, I want to dramatize it because, see, there is a root to every plant. And this foul plant of racism has roots. We've got to find those roots so that we can dig them up and destroy them, or else the cotton-picking plant will grow again. You can go and cut a tree down, cut grass down, cut bushes down. If you don't deal with the root, that baby's coming back. Given enough time, it will return without an invitation. So think about it. How unfair. The 18th century British statesman and orator Edmund Burke has been credited with saying, I don't know if he did or not, he's been credited with saying this, I quote, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." You get that? Listen to it. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. In the book of Proverbs, chapter 29 and verse 2, it says, you don't have to look this one up, but write it down. Proverbs chapter 29 and verse 2, it says, quote, "When the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. But when a wicked man rules, the people groan." End of quote. Our people are groaning, black and white alike. What are we going to do about it, America? What are we going to do about it? Continue with business as usual? Or are we going to rip up the roots, get this turkey out of the ground, and plant a brand new vineyard?
All right, so I'm going to stop it right there. So let that be the question to you. What are we going to do about it? Are we going to continue to sit back and not do anything? Or are we going to continue to be complacent about it? Because we know it's still out here. But yet, this current generation feels different on that. Because they haven't been through what some of us have been through. Or some of us have been taught about or read about. You know, they've been sugarcoated and stuff. But what are you going to do about it? Are you going to spread the word? Are you going to enlighten? Because remember now, books are being taken away under the guise of DEI. The history of black people. Because I heard one white man say, well, I've been taught black history in school, so why do we need a Black History Month? Really? You've been taught black history in school? What? You've been taught what? 3 sentences? I'm sure you've heard about Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman and Martin Luther King Jr., right? That's about it, right? Sure. Just like the rest of us. So what I'm saying, we need to get information out. Videos like these, give a like, share it, get this information out here. We need to have it regurgitated, okay, over and over and over. And when I say it in that manner, I mean it for us to fully process this. We have to keep, you know how something we learn something, then we pour out. That's what I mean by regurgitating, whereas we're pouring out this information and then we get it fused right back into ourselves, and then we pour it out again to people who need to know. That's what I mean by that, okay? So I don't mean it in a foul way. But really, we need to stop acting like, stop putting our heads in sand. We need to be enlightened, because there is a lot of stuff out here about our history, about things that are being backdoored on us, like the housing market. You know, when me and my wife got our home, this is our second home we bought that we're currently in, and we had to be enlightened that, you know, when it comes to interest rates, some people out there will railroad you into a higher interest rate because you're black, and while they'll give their white counterparts, or while they give their white friends, so to speak, better deals. And that, I just want to make you aware of that. Some of you may not even be aware of that goes on, but it goes on. Okay, so we have to say, like, okay, I'll give you an example, like selling your home. I've heard many situations where black people, they wanted to sell their home, so they had to make it look less black. Okay, they had to hide certain pictures, paintings, sculptures, whatever. They had to hide that to make it look more aesthetically pleasing to white, in order to get a sale. And then as far as interest rates, you know, you got to check up on some of these people who are selling homes, okay, realtors. Check up on some of them. Get to know about their track record, all right? Because some of them are shifty, some of them are shady. But you want to get with someone who is, you know, straight on the up and up, straight down the middle, and not going to try to railroad you because you're black. So, with that in mind, continue to renew your mind. Like I said,